So hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you, all of our panelists, all of our viewers to this panel on advancing equity through community engagement. I will do just a really quick introduction of myself and the organization that I'm here with, Lumos Transforms, and then quickly sort of introduce our panelists as well, and then we'll jump right into these questions. We have a lot of juicy things to talk about today. So my name is Devika. I use she and her pronouns. I am with Lumos Transforms, and Lumos has been working with DHS for the past over a year and a half on the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Initiative, the EDIA initiative. And we are a Los Angeles-based social organization that's really dedicated to shepherding individuals, communities, and organizations through positive change for a more healthy and equitable world. So we're really happy, we're really excited to be joining in these launch events as the DHS EDIA strategic plan has just been launched, the first ever. And we're celebrating this launch. We're excited to talk to all of you about some of these really important equity issues. So the purpose of this panel today is to really discuss community engagement and how it can advance equity. And so some of the things that we're going to highlight today are some of the key elements that can really ensure authentic community engagement. We'll talk about challenges and barriers, the role of community engagement in harm repair, the role in leadership and really paving the way for authentic community engagement. And for those of you who actually got to participate in the strategic planning process in the initiative, to talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you related to community engagement. So I'd like to introduce quickly our panelists today, and I'm doing this in alphabetical order. So first we have with us here Amy Turk. Amy Turk is the Chief Executive Officer of the Downtown Women's Center, where she oversees all programs and fosters vital relationships with community partners in efforts to end women's homelessness. She has more than 20 years of experience in the fields of social work and homeless services. Welcome, Amy, and thank you for joining us. Next, we have Andrea Welsing. Andrea Welsing is Director of the County Office of Violence Prevention, where she coordinates a comprehensive county-wide approach to violence prevention across multiple sectors and government agencies. She has more than 25 years of experience working collaboratively with multiple sectors and community partners to develop, implement, and evaluate public health programs. Welcome, Andrea. Next, we have with us Angel Martinez, who is the Director of Community Engagement for the Community Programs Unit at the Department of Health Services, and a health professional and activist whose work centers social justice and community health equity, population health, community-based participatory research, public health, health policy, and global health. Welcome, Angel. Next, we have Anne English. Anne English is the Program Director and Operations Lead for the CSH Speak Up initiative, which creates intentionally collaborative spaces where individuals with lived experience of homelessness can share their stories and advocate at the local, state, and federal level to shift the dominant narrative that misrepresents and stigmatizes their experiences. Welcome, Anne. Then we have Diamond Lee, who is the Director of Birth Equity and Community Collaboration for the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services Mama's Neighborhood Program, and has extensive experience managing a portfolio of projects that leverage government, philanthropic, and community resources to advance racial justice. Welcome, Diamond. And then finally, we have with us Tway Wen. Tway is a community member of the Reentry Advisory Collaborative, a program that helps the system-impacted population and strives to reduce mass incarceration, and served as a subcommittee co-lead for the DHS EDIA initiative. He runs a nonprofit dedicated to helping justice-involved individuals have a chance to better themselves. Welcome, Tway, and thank you all for joining us in this discussion. All right, so I'd love to jump into it now. And I want to start with this first question, really, that centers around how does community engagement advance equity? And in your experience in doing this work, what are some of the key elements or practices that ensure authentic community engagement? So I'd like to invite Diamond to speak to this first.
Yeah, I mean, this question just makes me think of the definition of racial equity that I like to center as like a process and an outcome. And the outcome is everyone has what they need to thrive, right? So we want equity where everyone can receive the services, support, resources to not just survive, but thrive. But then to get to that outcome, right, we have to center the process. And the process to get to that outcome is really centering the voices of those most impacted by systemic inequity, racism, et cetera. And so when I think about community engagement and I think about equity, we are engaging community to lead things that impact their lives. Those that are impacted need to be centered there. And then when I think about like the how and the practices, we have to start with ourselves. I think sometimes we jump to like, let's go to the community. And it's like, actually, how are we in community with each other, within our teams, with our peers, with our colleagues, with, other departments within our organization? Like that work starts with each other first. And if we're collaborating and engaging with each other effectively, then that can naturally translate to authentic engagement with the community. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Diamond. I'd love to pass it next to Angel to speak to this.
Of course. Thank you. And again, thank you for having me. And it's great to be amongst colleagues and comrades and partners. And thank you, Lumos, for having us and creating the space really to think about what does meaningful community engagement mean. I think for me, when I think about meaningful community engagement, it's centering community first and foremost, and then thinking about what are the core principles that we identify and that we know are important in order to, one, hold at the center community, whether that be our patients or participants, and also humanize that space as well, right? Because while we are health professionals, I am still a brother, I am still a son. My community and the community I live in is still impacted, by a variety of different isms and disparities. And community engagement really is thinking about what are those core principles that we're bringing to the table, that we foster, that we say we utilize as a way of holding ourselves accountable. And as well as the work. And we can, there's so many, there's so many core principles that we could look at, whether that's trust and co-creation, co-development, shared governance, all the way through equitable financing and inclusion, right? And so, thinking and understanding what those core principles are and how we continue to foster and grow them and evolve them over time becomes really important to centering community and engaging community in a community engagement framework.
Thank you, Angel. And maybe Andrea, if you'd like to speak to this question as well.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Lumos, for hosting us and for allowing Public Health and the Office of Violence Prevention to be part of this conversation. As a newly formed office, I think this idea of authentic community engagement is very important to us. And I do think that authentic community engagement does advance equity by the very virtue of, instead of a traditional model or a historical model where especially government institutions and agencies have come into communities with, already developed solutions or an idea of how they want to advance the work or promote health or solutions. What it does is it flips that model and it flips that power dynamic to really say the voices of those who are most impacted are the ones that really need to inform and develop the solutions in partnership with government entities and county entities. So it's not extracting government, but how do we work together? So with the issue of violence prevention, which we're focused on, and we know that Black and brown men of color are disproportionately impacted by the issue of gun and gang violence in communities that do not have resources and have not been resourced. Those are the voices we need to listen to, and we need to sit at the table and just listen. And I think along the ideas of what are the practices or elements, I think it is a long-term process. It is really going into community engagement with this idea that it's about developing relationships, it's about sitting back and listening, it's about understanding what's already in place and acknowledging that. It's about acknowledging our historic role in causing harm and understanding that the mistrust that's there, we're going to have to overcome, but we're going to also have to be accountable. I also think, and I'll stop in a minute, because I don't want to take up too much time, but as we think about authentic community engagement, I think we have to go several layers down on that and really understand the practices of where do we go, what are the tables where we're creating, are we going to other people's tables, who's not at the table, who's most impacted, and really ensuring that even with community-based organizations at the table, sometimes we have to go deeper, like who's not at the table and why. And so when you talk about resources and creating that space, I think we really have to understand how do we go beyond the initial layers of who comes to the table to really ensure that the most marginalized of voices and those who are hurting the most, that they also have a voice, and we also hear from those populations and individuals. So thank you.
Thank you. There's so many elements that each of you spoke to that sort of actually lead into the next couple of questions that we have. And so what I heard you all talk about was thinking about both process and outcome, that sometimes we become over-focused on the outcome and we forget that equity has to be built into the process as we go. There was this idea of centering really core principles and centering the voices of those who are impacted, thinking about inverting power dynamics, thinking about how things have historically been done, harm that has been done. So I want to sort of pull those two things apart. And the first thing that I want to invite you all to talk about is thinking about this piece about process versus outcome, or even just process and outcome. So equity work takes time and resources. And unfortunately, we often see community engagement models that ask community members to volunteer their time and resources, which is really antithetical to equity. So what are some of the ways to ensure that equity and inclusion are within this process of community engagement, are really embedded into it, are part of the process itself, and not just expect for these things to happen at the end, at the outcome? So I'd like to invite Amy to speak to this first.
Thanks, Davika. I am so impressed with the work that Lumos has done with the county, and I'm taking notes on the process. And if, hopefully our audience will be able to see exactly how you went about full inclusion and compensation. And I think at Downtown Women's Center and our work in coalition, we've really evolved to make sure that we're creating space and opportunities for people with the closest proximity to the issues that we're working on, and a model of compensation around that. Where I'm really struggling as a leader is how to do that for our staff members too. Downtown Women's Center is really rooted in a model that we've labeled as shared leadership for years and years and years, something I've purposely chose Downtown Women's Center for when I came 9 years ago, and is really important to me. But I hear time and time again of how taxing it is to participate in these conversations and to lean in to the DEI work that everyone wants, the social justice work, but again and again, how hard it is and how it feels like it's on top of the work. And so I'm doing a lot of personal reflection, a lot of work together with my team on how to infuse it in the work, and not make it this like extra thing that we do in committee, but something that really gets folded in, and really trying to shift what shared leadership means, not that it means extra work, but that it means that you see your feedback, your input, your contribution rolled out in our policies, in our programs, in our efforts, in our voice in the community. So those are just some of my thoughts around that.
Thank you, Amy. Anne, would you like to share some thoughts about this as well?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have so many thoughts. I mean, just since the beginning of this, there's so many layers to all of this. And really, you know, what we're talking about is culture change, right? And as others have mentioned, that's the long game, you know, that doesn't happen overnight. It's you know, building in these practices and continuing to do this work and moving forward, even when it seems like, you know, sometimes things are moving backwards. In my experience with the Speak Up program, there has been such an evolution around, I mean, even from the beginning, and I think this happens with so many people, the best of intentions, you have the best of intentions, you are centering the folks that are most impacted, you are giving a voice, you are giving a platform, all of these things. And still, there are many things that come up, you know, along that journey. And there are things that cannot be dismissed, because if we are truly hoping to elevate and embed this work into this system, we have to pay attention to how that is impacting those folks that we are bringing into it. So yes, that has to do with compensation and all of those things. And it also has to do with the space that you create for them and the space that you allow them to create for this work, right? And all of these things are things that have been, you know, have come over time as at least for me, as I've done more of this work with individuals who are impacted. There's no question, I think we all know, I believe in this work, and I'm sure at least people on this call, that this is the work that we need to do. And still, I think what sometimes gets lost is the work that we need to do, like Amy said, within our organizations, within ourselves. I mean, to really, you know, to really, as we talk about with anti-racism work a lot, lean into the idea of discomfort and lean into the idea that we are part of the system, that we are hoping to change and dismantle. And there's an incredible amount of, you know, stuff that comes up from that, right? And that is transferred as well, you know, but truly becoming partners, I think, requires us, yeah, to compensate people financially and to also look at our practices of how we engage with people and how we provide support and agency and leadership opportunities for those folks.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, again, you're speaking to so many things that there are so many questions that we have here, that all of these pieces are so interconnected. And what I'm hearing in this is that, yes, compensation is a very key part of this, but there's more to it than just compensation as well, that this is really about redefining what power sharing really means, and really centering that and understanding that there is a historical context to the way that this has been done in the past, and that we want to shift those power dynamics as or flip them, as Andrea was speaking to. And so I want to sort of move this into our next question, which is a little bit more about thinking about this idea of harm repair. Or just even harm that has been done. And so engaging community members in a process with an institution like DHS, which has historically caused harm to certain communities, can present certain challenges. So what are some of the ways, first, that we can start to rebuild relationships and reestablish trust with communities that have been historically harmed and marginalized? So I'd like to start there, and would like to welcome Diamond to begin by speaking to this.
I just have so much gratitude and I'm feeling like flooded with emotions, and like I'm really appreciating this conversation. And it's really making me reflect on like my time with the RAC. T and I work on that together, the Reentry Health Advisory Collaborative. And I don't know that there's any one way. You know, I think acknowledgement and validation is extremely important. I'm appreciating this piece around like, it's not just about compensation, because the RAC they're compensated, right? And compensated well, but what they're thinking they have to produce in relation to what the institution gives them, it's like, no. You know, consultants make $200 an hour, right? You don't have to go to every single meeting and do all, you know, like if we're breaking it up, right, on a consultant hourly rate, actually you're providing over and beyond, right? So like being able to break down like what it means for you to show up and just be enough and listen and share your voice and validate that. It can feel really hard to be in a conversation as the only or one of few community stakeholders with all, you know, county correctional health, you know, probation, you know, like that's hard, you know? And so just being available to that and validating that constantly. And then again, as what's been lifted up already, creating space for the acknowledgement and not just trying to create solutions all the time. That's the healing work that needs to happen, right? It's like, you know, yes, folks can show up in the space. Yes, they can speak up, but what does that feel like? You know, let's talk about it. And so we try to create space around that, of like, let's talk about like what it feels like to be in the space and not feel like you're being heard, to feel like the content is not, you know, it's a bunch of data that's not reflective of what you're actually experiencing. Like, and they're not listening.
Yeah.
You know, so that has been a part of the change work, you know, just the validation of experience, the validation of we are enough, the validation of no, it's not us, it's them.
Yeah. Thank you, Diamond. Andrea, I wonder if you'd like to speak to this as well.
Yes, thank you. And Diamond, thank you for your remarks. I echo, you know, just the appreciation for the conversation and being in this space and agree absolutely. I mean, you know, the first step is to acknowledge the harm and to know that and to acknowledge that in spaces. And then I think there are a number of ways in which you can repair that harm, but I think it all requires time. Sometimes it involves, you can involve resources, but it is about rebuilding that trust. And I think so this is all interwoven because it is about the resourcing, and the resourcing is definitely that compensation piece, but it's more than that, as you mentioned. It's how do we not only ask people to come to the table around our issues, but then how do we support community and show up not just with money or compensation, but with our time and our support and whatever. The Office of Violence Prevention, we have data, we have connections to other partners. So it's bringing all those resources to support community. And so it's about compensation at the individual. It's about addressing systems and policies and practices that have been harmful and working alongside community to change those, even hiring and contracting practices. Like, how do we work alongside to show really that we're working alongside, we're showing up not for community, but also around issues that are important to community, not just ours. It's understanding how we, especially as county governments, we have all of these initiatives and people get tapped into and we fragment that. And so it's figuring out how do we do community engagement in a way that is more coordinated or more respectful of people's time and abilities and capacity, you know, that isn't, you know, a response to our siloed ways of doing work, but really understanding from community perspective. So I think, you know, repairing harm is in so many ways, it's about building relationships, it's about the long term. And I will say this last piece is it's about the transparency, the accountability, and the communication. And that's where the comment, Anne, about, you know, how, and Amy, about looking internally, there's so many ways to look internally, but if we too are stretched and we're investing in a piecemeal way and we don't have like the consistency of communicating beyond an initiative of being and really with community through the long term, and how we communicate back, whether it's hard because something that was provided input didn't happen. So we have to acknowledge that, or it did happen and we need to show that. And so there's so many pieces to this. But again, it boils down to the relationship, and it's how do we show up really, truly, authentically, and provide support and compensation, but give of our time and our focus, and as well as any kind of financial remuneration or other supports that we might be able to provide.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I heard in what you shared, I also heard an echoing of some of the things that Angel had mentioned at the beginning, one of which is that we're centering these core principles, and you named transparency, communication, and accountability, and then also this piece around humanizing community, humanizing ourselves in this work. So understanding that we are multifaceted beings, and that we bring our whole selves to this work, and to really acknowledge that. And so Angel, I'm actually wondering if there's anything else that you want to add here about how community engagement can promote and advance harm repair.
Yeah, I think, to be able to promote and advance harm repair, it's also, I think one is an acknowledgement of it in itself. And it's also taking ownership of what those mistakes are. I think at no way or at any capacity, should we not allow for ourselves to listen to each other, to say, hey, like, this is, I made this mistake and this is how it took place, right? And that it could be as simple as the conversations that we create, whether they're one-on-one, or whether they're at the table with leadership. And then it's saying, how are we also not functioning in a vacuum where we're allowing the spaces that are created to flourish with those that were already harmed, right? And also to ensure that we as a system, because I do think that, as we look at a system of healthcare, or we are looking at a system of community and as groups, show up with as Andrea shared, with the authenticity and the genuine respect for centering justice, right? Because that's where harm came from, right? We need to acknowledge that the harm was done, there was an injustice done. And when we center justice, we then begin to look at the different layers of where all those injustices sit. And we're not going to be able to do them all at one time, right? There's no hurry, because there's an urgency at times, right? But I think the hurry is also part of this outcome driven, right? Repairing harm, there's not an outcome for repairing harm, right? There's justice that needs to be done, right? So that takes time. So I think part of that is, as I said, the acknowledgement, taking ownership, having those hard conversations, and then ultimately centering those conversations around justice.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I want to open this question up to any of you actually who have something that you'd like to share a little bit more about this, about building relationships, rebuilding trust, harm repair. Anne?
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said, and from my own experience, what has been super important to me, and what I see as extension of what we've discussed, is just this very strong inability for us to self-interrogate, right? We talk about self-reflection, we talk about repair, and yet there is still this resistance to, like what Angel was saying about transparently saying, I was wrong, I made a mistake. And you cannot move from that mistake to any resolution until you come to that place and are able to do that. And our culture in general is not, it's a white supremacist culture, it's corporate culture. It does not heed that kind of transparency. And that is the sort of thing that we must, continue to break down in order to do this work. And I mean, there have been so many times in the last 10 years that I've said to myself, because of something that has happened, I mean, I know it's fine. You will make mistakes, you take risks, we all do that. That's part of it. But if you know that something is not okay, or is not a risk that you want to take, or you feel is inappropriate, there have been a lot of times where I've said to myself, we should not do this. It's not about, I mean, I do think that there is some level of trend that's that's happening, where people are very much engaged with and understanding that centering those impacted is in alignment with equity, racial equity, housing equity, all of those things. And I think that there is less of an understanding, as we were talking about how to do that in an intentional way that does not cause more harm. And being willing to devote those resources, especially time and energy and emotional energy that is required to do that work, and which is really, I mean, important. It's a big, it feels like a lot, but compared to what we have, it really is not. But we just haven't gotten to the point where we're willing to do that. And I just would love to see that change.
Thank you, Anne. And Tway, would you like to speak to this as well?
Yes. So when we think about pain, I think we have to think about where it started from. And I think most of the decision making it came from the leadership level on top. And that's how all the decision making that impact the community. And so that is how the people on the bottom, the marginalized community affecting, and that is how all the issues started off. And so for us, part of being, we represent our community. And so we look at it as like, okay, we have to figure out where the problem came from. And we have to listen to the people that's causing all this, raising all the issue. And we have to help them and reach to the top level and let them know, hey, this issue here came from the decision making that from you guys, and how it's impacting our community right here. And so that's how we have to let them know it's caused a lot of problem. And so we have to help those can be able to raise in their voice. And so that's so important. And so I think that this whole process is not just helping people that's bring all the hosts within our community, but also we help them provide a lot of valuable resources and allow them to come to the listening session and speak on the behalf of what they want to say. And that's how it's.
Thank you, Tway. So there's so many, again, common threads that are coming through all of this. And the two of the things that I really heard in this was one about just really value-centered work, that is so important, the values of justice, of accountability, of transparency, of communication, all of these things. And then also the piece around resources and looking at resources as beyond just monetary, that is important, and that there are also resources around time and support and all of these different things. And Tway, I think what you were just speaking to really segues us beautifully into some of these next questions that I wanted to pose to you all about the role of leadership. So what is the role of leadership in paving the way for authentic community engagement? And Amy, I'd love to invite you to speak to this one first.
I wanted to hear from Tway. But you gave me the mic. I think being a white leader is unique in comparison to leaders of color in this space, and the role of super working on yourself is even more important. And finding ways to feel and express humility, deep listening, standing with people. In my last couple years of work in this space, what I've learned a lot about is, previously I felt like I was creating space for others, and then I listened, and people also wanted to hear what I had to say on the matter too, as the leader. And so balancing that, and really speaking up in the space of social justice, and realizing that people wanted and need that too, while simultaneously creating space for others and opportunities. And I would, go back to my fangirl status with Lumos Transforms, and I've used the resiliency toolkit a lot, and I've evangelized it to others and relied on others. Folks on this call do really good work in this space, and so that's the take that I've been taking for the last couple of years, at least, to super work on myself, be in community with others, use the resources in Los Angeles that exist, communicate out to my stakeholders what I'm doing, and support them in the work too.
See me, and I am actually going to bounce this back to Tway to hear a little bit more if you have any additional thoughts about what is the role of leadership in paving the way for authentic community engagement.
Yes, sure. So one thing about leadership is there's too many ways that we can lead somebody. There's different skill set for it. But for me, I feel like it's more like building trust within the community, and that's the one form. And then the other form is like sometimes we just have to listen more, and I think that's how important, because the moment that we just listen to somebody and understand the harm, the cause, all the issue that raised by somebody, what exactly you're gonna do by making good decision. And most of the time that leadership fail because they not listen to somebody. They assume that it's okay, this is the decision that I think can be useful. But however, in the community, we have different type of people. We have different background people and culture. And so sometimes it's not exactly how we think the outcome would be because of our own experience, and we bias on our decision making. And so I think it's listening is very important, and that is how we understand how we can make the right choice for everybody.
Thank you, Tway. So yeah, this commitment to listening, and what I also hear in that, what you described as this cultural humility as well, that there's an accountability to that piece. And as leaders yourselves in this space, I wonder if you can sort of speak to what advice would you give to leadership about both supporting individual and organizational readiness for change, for the type of culture change that we're talking about. So Diamond, if you'd like to speak to this a little bit.
I don't know about advice, but I'll say what I'm practicing, because I don't know, this question makes me really emotional as a Black woman who feels like I have to fight, to get to leadership levels. And I am in a leadership position, right? And so experiences of like feeling tokenized, right? Experiences of like wanting to advocate for myself and specific issues. Like it's a lot to navigate and balance. So the words that come to mind for me are power and privilege. I'm in constant conversation with myself and others around power, privilege, the power that I hold, the privilege that I hold, the impact on the work, right? Because I'm doing work around African-American infant and maternal mortality, as well as the Reentry Health Advisory Collaborative, both issues that I'm impacted by, but I also hold a position of power and privilege in my work in the county as I do this work. And so my situation and my positionality is different than those that I might be in conversation with regularly. And I have to be mindful of that as I navigate in different spaces. When I'm in a county meeting with county bureaucrats, I might be advocating from a different position than when I'm in community with folks who are impacted, and like just being able to be aware of that and deepen my understanding of that, so that it's showing that like we all need to be responsible for the power and privilege that we hold, regardless of where we are, right? When we have a position to speak around an issue, like that's a position of power, you know? And so, yeah, I'm just trying to be in practice with that for myself so that I can show up differently. And also, hopefully, other leaders will be able to do the same in the work.
Thank you, Diamond. Would anyone else like to speak to this question?
Yeah, I think briefly what I would say is, and I think I appreciate, Diamond for saying like, what are the practices I do for myself? Because it's where it starts, right? And I think, as I shared earlier, it's like, how do I center like the work, right, around justice, and ensure that like, as I think about justice, that there's clearly injustices. It's why we're all here. And then more importantly is, how do I challenge the status quo, right? How do I, as a queer person, as a queer leader, as a Latinx queer male, right, that has passing privilege, like as I look at those intersectionalities for myself, and I hold true to them, I say, how do I challenge the status quo and show up differently? And I think that, over the last year and a half, and over the work that Lumos has done too, and seeing some of those changes, I think the establishment of creating a community programs division for the Department of Health Services is in its entity as a form, and that it doesn't fall under, population health or a different component, that it is a standalone, right? What are also the resources and the support that is being instituted for community engagement? Or does it just get folded into everything else? And the hope and the wish is that it's happening, right? And so I think it's centering that justice piece, and then also challenging that status quo, so that we're able to look at things differently. There doesn't need to stay the same. And when we dream big, it doesn't look the same. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this one? Yeah, Andrea. Oh, sorry, Andrea, and then Anne.
Okay. No, so much good, I think, responses, and I agree with what's been said. And I think, this idea of advice it's about listening, it's about showing up. And as leadership, sometimes you get more pulled away from the very community level work that you started with, because you suddenly get really you're managing things, and so to show up, don't forget to show up, and don't forget to listen. And then I would just say, it's this balance of what we say, it's the process, it's what you talked about, Davika, earlier. Process is just, it impacts outcome, and the processes and how we build things are important to what we hope to achieve. And even if we commit to the ideas of equity and authentic community engagement, if we do not create space and time, which is what I think that balance of, there's so much pressure to produce outcomes and move the work quickly, but we have to invest the time. And wherever we are on the leadership spectrum or within our organizations, that hierarchy, it's just really important to make sure that we, as was said, challenge the status quo, do the self-reflection, but also really advocate for what we know is true practice as we do the work. And so I would just add that to the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed. And just want to add again the emphasis on really the need to commit to not doing the work if we do not have the resources or the capacity to do it appropriately, which is, I think, that's the pressure that we feel all the time. We have to do it, we have to do it. We have time, we have these resources are going to, the way it's set up, and we wind up, doing things in the way that, that's been, an ongoing conversation within, my organization as well as several other communities we work with, that I'm at that point where I am not willing to compromise that, right? If we do not have what is in place to do this with the most intentionality, then it is not worth it to do it, and we have to kind of get to that place. That's the only thing that's ever going to create, those resources for us, I feel or believe. And just to say again, other folks have said it, but relationships are everything. Our ability to be in those relationships, and the ability to bring other people into these relationships, proximate relationships with others who are impacted, makes it has a profound impact. And that is what I've seen through a lot of the work in community and with volunteers and public, in the public, and even political, legislators and all of that, that building a relationship with someone who's been impacted, there is nothing that has that kind of impact on people. And the relationships that we build with each other, I'm sort of rambling. I want to get this one thing in, which is, I'm sure everybody's heard it before. I've heard it from many different places. I have no idea where it came from. But the idea that, change happens at the speed of trust. Mm-hmm. And what that means to me is we take the time that is necessary to rebuild, repair, and create trust within community. And that is when we are able to make these changes. And, anything we do to shortcut that, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And, what I hear in everything that you've shared is really, there's, again, sort of two pieces to this. One is about the self-reflection, and self-reflection both at the individual level and at the organizational or institutional level. And then this other piece about building those relationships and challenging the status quo and actually transforming the systems and the cultures themselves. And at Lumos, we often talk about this as both being the change and making the change, and fluidly navigating between the both and not focusing too much on one or the other. And so just really hearing that as that both of these things are needed for leadership to really pave the way for authentic community engagement. I wonder if there's any other sort of challenges that you've experienced, either as someone who's working with community members or as a community member yourself, that you would like to speak to, any challenges that you've experienced in equity processes, and any suggestions that you may have for addressing those challenges. And I think maybe we can start with Shui for this one.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so for me, some of the challenges that I've been to was because my background a little bit different, and so I don't work on the medical field and the other area that I'm not familiar with, and taking on the co-lead role, it was a little bit of challenge for me to understand the concept, the workforce, a lot of things that I'm not familiar. However, during the time that I was in there, for me, being observant and listening to people talk about their experience and their expertise helped me learn about what they've been through and how they use those skill set and work within the strategic planning. And so, and another challenge was that it's daunting, to be honest, because this growth is I know that it affect a lot of many people out there, and sometimes I have a little bit of self-doubt that I don't know my decision is accurate or not, and sometimes I just have to be aware of what I am saying and how all the planning can be implemented. And so those are the things that I'm a little bit afraid. However, the more that I've been through the process, the more I'm confident within myself, and I have to put that trust in my team and what I believe that what's best. and but I try my best to do it, and so that is something that I feel I'm really happy about it.
Thank you, Tway. Yeah, so there's this piece around building trust in community, but also in ourselves. And I think there's a piece also that you're highlighting around this need for capacity building, that is an important piece of this resourcing that's needed for this work as well. Anything that you'd like to add, Angel, to this?
I agree with what everyone else has already shared. I think that if we don't dedicate the resources, right, then we are not wanting to be intentional about it, because there's no way that we ensure that this work is done correctly and at the right capacity. And if we could, we would have already done it, right? We're all already here, and if we could, we would have already done it. But the resources mean so much to really thinking about the impact that it will have, both at the individual level and at the group level. And that investment means that that is our beginnings of shifting culture, and culture change work and culture shift work takes time. And time is money, as many times say, and money is time, right? And just as much time as we invest in ourselves and vice versa. And it's not, I also don't want to say it from a capitalistic framework either, but it's really about the investment that we put into one another, right? And those resources become important, whether that's protected time as a workforce member, whether that's adjusting what that work balance looks like, right? Because there's only so much bandwidth we all can carry at all levels, right? Whether we're on the front lines or, on executive leadership. And then how we lean in on each other, like really how we lean in on each other. I won't do this by myself, but I know at least 6 other people in this space that I know I can lean in on now. And that becomes important to those relationships that folks are sharing.
Thank you. And Amy, is there anything that you would want to add to this question as well, about challenges, suggestions, and how to work through those challenges?
Yeah, I'm appreciating everyone lifting up the time. I feel like it's really easy to start something, to kick off something and to convey a vision of how it could be better, but to really, think long term. I have the privilege of working with Anne in the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition, 5 years in the works now. And we're all running coalitions here, there's ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, and staying with it in a co-design model has been really fulfilling, but really long-term work.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, and the final question that I want to pose is actually specifically geared to Diamond, Tway, and Angel, who have been really deeply engaged in the DHS EDIA initiative and strategic planning process. And I wondered if you could just share a little bit about what your experience was like as a community member, as someone really engaged in this process, and what were some of the challenges, what were things that worked well, anything that you'd like to share about the process itself.
I can start. I just had so much gratitude for the process, practicing like authentic engagement as well as inclusion, right? The intention and the work to really include many voices, right? And compensate community voices as well in a massive institution like DHS. And so I appreciated that. And with that, I also experienced the tension of like what it actually means to do that, right? And it's hard to include many people in engaging in a process that is time limited, right? We're speaking to these things, but you want to move the work forward, right? Because you feel the momentum, you feel like the buy-in, around it. And so, yeah, I definitely felt the tension, but I also was able to really, I want to call in the Timo Kuhn white supremacy culture article, because that is where we're situated, And so to work I had to manage my own expectations about what it means to work to kind of dismantle white supremacy culture in an institution that has, you know, a history of what it does and is moving to change. And so with that, it allowed me to see that this is actually massive, this work that we're doing. Even though I might be feeling something, you know, I might be having my own experiences around like the pressures, right? The, you know, progress is bigger, more, the sense of urgency, all of that. I know that this is actually a massive move in this institution. So yeah, I had gratitude for it. And I've definitely felt pain throughout.
Yeah. Thank you, Diamond.
As I already shared on some of the challenges that I've been through, so now I'm just gonna talk on what's the process look like for me. It was like so we have so many people with different mindset and with this different experience in the group, and so we, like Diamond mentioned, a lot of us, it's very intense. We end up talk a lot and share a lot of things, which is something so much different than one another. And so we would back and forth the whole process. However, after we go into that divergent stage, we pretty much we understand about, okay, so which one is we try to implement, which one we feel like it can be useful. And I believe that each one of us has something to say in there, and or the decision making that it came from the group, we all agree to it. And that is something that I feel like it's helped me feel so confident and then feel so much helpful in the whole process. And so when the whole thing finished, it was like it was overwhelming, to be honest, because there's a lot of stuff going on. But also it just feel relief afterward. We feel like, oh man, now it's done. We want to see the result, what it look like. But yeah, like everybody said earlier, the result sometimes it have to take a long process, and it's not something that we can just rush, because we have to put our plan, our mind, our soul into it. So that's something that I think we work with really well within the group, and I can't wait to see it develop in the future.
Thank you, Ty.
You know, I say this pretty repetitively. I've been doing community engagement work for a long time now, and the EDIA work that I've now embarked on with community programs as a division has meant that it's a lot of sharing that lived experience. And I think that what I took away was, well, one was, I've said it a lot, like I said, was I couldn't believe I was watching this at work. I was like, am I watching this at work? Because those are all conversations I've had at, you know, different organizations that do social justice work. Those are all conversations and engagement that I was doing as an organizer, right? And those are all conversations that I have with my friends and my comrades. And I was ecstatic to be able to see it in a space like a county department. I think that there is a huge opportunity for that to grow and to change. And it was hard to move through it many times. I think as a queer person, navigating spaces where, you know, that there's not space to entirely be you at times. And then there is, you're like, oh, I run, you know, I was like, oh, I'm here for it. And I was really blessed to be able to be part of those affinity groups, right? So shout out to the LGBT and the Latinx affinity group. And to have that space created, because that's been the very first piece, is that there was space actually there for us to engage. And that's how all good things start, right? So yeah.
Thank you so much, Angel. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. And I would love to hear you all talk about this so much more. There's so many other questions that are brewing in my mind. But that's all we have time for today. So I just want to thank each and every one of you again for being here, for engaging in this discussion and really highlighting from your experiences, from the work that you've done, just how we can make this happen. What are the challenges? What are some of the ways that we can overcome those challenges? And how do we really center those values and those core principles in this work that you've each highlighted so beautifully? So I just want to thank you all again so much for this rich and beautiful discussion. I want to thank all the viewers for watching and listening to this discussion. And I also want to encourage everyone, there are several other launch events happening around the DHS EDIA strategic plan around DHS. So please visit the SharePoint website. That will give you a list of all of the different events that are happening. And I really encourage you to attend them and really celebrate the launch of this EDIA strategic plan with us. So again, thank you all so much. It's been such a joy.